We all love magic items. They make our characters more powerful and enable new strategies in D&D. That's why there are tons of videos that look just like this one, explaining why certain items are underpowered, overpowered, stupidly broken, or game-changing. But the D&D world isn't just about those 3 to 6 characters portrayed by the people at your table. In fact, in the grand scheme of things, these characters are unlikely to have universally applicable effects upon your world. In my view, there are 2 things that make a magic item impactful, and those are its availability and its impact across society. So with that said, I've evaluated nearly 100 items in published D&D materials, and here are the results. First off, this video and its companion coming next week are limited to common magic items. As the name suggests, these are the most prevalent types of magic items in D&D styled worlds. To craft a common magic item, a craftsman who doesn't need to be a magic user themselves can spend 1 week and 50 gold, as long as they can also use materials from CR 1 to 3 monsters, according to Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This is not terribly prohibitive. 50 gold pieces is less than 2 months of modest living for one person, or 5 days of an aristocratic lifestyle. And it's not like low CR monsters, CR 1 to 3, are uncommon to find killed around a random village or town somewhere. And this is all it takes, alongside a week's work and a crafting recipe, to get your own common magic item. Common magic items are so much cheaper and more available than any other possibility. And so that is what we're going to be discussing today, the most basic of basic magic items, and how they, the ones that are most populous, the ones that are in the hands of the most people, will shift society. So our question for today is, which common magic item is the best? We're doing this alphabetically for the most part. We're going to discuss what each item does, any potential use cases, and then giving it a score, an impact score, out of 10. The arm blade, requiring attunement, is a hidden weapon, a hidden blade only usable by the Warforged. This is only really useful if people in your world assume that a creature with no weapons is a non-threat. And considering it's got a very niche use case already, this is a 1 out of 10. The Armour of Gleaming cannot get dirty. Its only use really is as a display piece that saves on your cleaner having to clean it every so often or polish it up. It's going to be a 1 out of 10. The Band of Loyalty is essentially a ring that requires attunement to ensure that when you drop to 0 hit points, you instantly die. It might ostensibly be useful for taking your secrets to the grave if the entire school of divination magic, and Speak with Dead specifically, didn't exist. 2 out of 10. The Bead of Nourishment provides 1 full day's nourishment when consumed. This is useful for long voyages, wilderness survival, or where you need to travel light potentially, but it is worth noting that the Goodberry spell is literally 10 times better. 4 out of 10. The Bead of Refreshment turns 1 pint of liquid into cold, fresh drinking water. This could be useful in a wilderness survival context for making stagnant water or seawater potable, but it doesn't have any effect on poison or magical liquids. So I'm a bit torn. It's decent for survival situations. It might be worth having if you're a traveller. So we'll call it a 5 out of 10. The Boots of False Tracks are an interesting one. They only really work against enemies that are capable of visual-based tracking in environments that makes any sense. But disguising your own tracks as other humanoids' tracks is a really useful skill. Your major use is probably going to be disguising and obfuscating your own tracks to stop you being hunted or followed. Largely for merchants and people who are tracking through the wilderness. Probably your best bet is to disguise your tracks as a goblin or kobold, as people are going to assume that they don't really have much going for them and following them, and goblins aren't going to want to follow other goblins' tracks necessarily. They don't necessarily lead to where all the riches are. At least the unplundered ones. 7 out of 10. The bottle of Boundless Coffee dispenses coffee whenever you take a sip, but fails if you try and pour any of it out into a container, or just randomly 5% of the time whenever you take a sip. At that time, it becomes useful for an hour. If coffee is rare and expensive, then this bottle will pay for its own construction over time. Unfortunately, it is really only usable by one person, as running out after a few sips is not really necessarily ideal. 3 out of 10. Coffee is a diuretic. This is only really useful in social situations, not in any sort of wilderness survival capability or any sort of regular drinking either. The breathing bubble is a viscous bubble that contains enough air to breathe for an hour every day. Freediving becomes scuba diving. Trade relationships and conversations with merfolk under the sea become enhanced. This item has the potential to open up a whole new world. Wrong Disney film. 7 out of 10. Candles of the deep burn just like regular candles, but underwater. There are easier ways to generate light underwater, but these also generate heat. Enough to forge tin, lead, zinc, and aluminium underwater. Say hello to basic merfolk metallurgy. This is a 9 out of 10. I also made an entire video on merfolk civilization, so do check that out after this one.
The Cartographer's Map Case from Acquisitions Incorporated technically requires the use of the franchise feature to obtain, but for completion's sake, if we analyze it as its own common item, it can reveal shortcuts on maps that you own and place inside it. If you succeed on a DC 15 perception check, these cut your travel times in half. If you get a 20 or higher on this check, you can also gain advantage on your next attempt to try and traverse this terrain successfully. This feature can be used once a long rest. A separate feature also allows you to make a DC 15 perception check, this time to manifest a relevant map with a landmark marked upon it, and you get full knowledge of the terrain within a mile of that landmark. This feature is available once per 7 days, and would likely be highly prized, earning it a 6 out of 10 if we can get it without using the franchise mechanic from Acquisitions Incorporated, which might be a little difficult for non-player characters to manage.
The Cast Off Armor allows you to use a single action either to wear it or to stop wearing it. This effect is clearly best when tied with heavy armor, like plate, for example, which can take 10 minutes to get on, and plate is your best choice, whether you're proficient with it or not. Wealthy nobles should probably keep the cast-off armor by their bed in case of an assassination attempt, and can use their action to magically gain an 18 armor class in a single turn, no matter if you are proficient or have any training with armor at all. Sure, you can't cast spells or fight effectively if you're not proficient, but why should that stop you from gaining an 18 armor class, which is better than mage armor for sure, and just yelling and shouting, hoping they won't make it through the plate armor? It is a niche use case, but one that very few paranoid nobles would go without, especially because it's non-attunement. 6 out of 10. Charlatan's Dice. This D6 requires attunement, but once you've got it, you can choose what face that the D6 rolls onto. This seems incredibly potent. If you can smuggle this dice into a game, you're very likely to win and win some great money gambling. But in a world with telekinesis, mage hand, gusts, mage hand legerdman especially, and, the Charlatan's Dice, this may work on a local level, but as soon as large stakes and big egos get involved, the detect magic is coming out, which will not go well for any wielder of the Charlatan's Die. The Chest of Preserving states that food or other perishable items do not age or decay while inside it. As presented in the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, this is a 2.5 foot by 1.5 foot by 1 foot tall chest. It can be locked, and it becomes non-magical if the chest or the lock are damaged. Even discounting potential cheesy use cases like filling the entire chest with Goodberries that, by the rules of the chest, do not age, and therefore may bypass the 24-hour limit on Goodberries' potency as a bead of nourishment for, an entire day. This item holds within it incredible potential, as well as 3 3/4 cubic feet worth of space, if we count those measurements as the interior measurements. It would also be a literal lifesaver on long sea voyages. Fresh fruit and vegetables are critical for staving off scurvy. And for anyone, a chest filled with completely imperishable food, drinks, and all sorts of things is a godsend. Furthermore, maintaining a high-protein store of fresh produce throughout an entire winter may serve rural communities incredibly well. And to top it all off, the chest also has valuable in holding and transporting valuable bits of dead monsters, which, might I remind you, are used in the crafting of these very chests themselves. To put it simply, the presence of a magically infinite refrigerator with no power source is an incredible boon to literally anyone in the world. 10 out of 10. The Cleansing Stone from Eberron is another item with a lot of promise. It's a reasonably hefty stone that, when touched by anyone, can clean dirt or grime from a person or their garments. Notably, this doesn't remove nasty stains or mend your clothes, but cleanliness is certainly a public good. Assuming this has roughly the same effect as washing yourself and your clothes with soapy water, this will have immense implications on health, hygiene, and the spread of disease. The spread of dysentery, diarrhea, and polio would all be massively reduced if it became a habit for people to visit the Cleansing Stone, before preparing food, or just a few times a day, maybe once or twice even. Assuming that the object itself doesn't become a receptacle for all sorts of diseases by all the people touching it. I assume the magic that cleanses people would take care of that too. This revolutionises healthcare and hygiene in any place that it is used. Semmelweis eats your heart out, and would be easily trackable as well, even by standard just ledger methods of recording deaths, which did happen throughout our history. You'd be able to see the drastic reduction in death by certain diseases. In a world where this item from Eberron exists, we can be pretty sure we'd find it in most town squares, probably publicly funded by some church or town, simply by the virtue of how much money it saves on sending healers out from the local church. 10 out of 10. Crashing back down to earth, the Cloak of Billowing is utterly useless. You can make it billow using your bonus action. I cannot find a use case. 1 out of 10. The Cloak of Many Fashions can disguise it as any cloak in existence, including the really rare ones and the magical ones. This has a minor bluffing potential, demonstrating you've slain a displacer beast without, the actual skills to prove it, but all it's really going to do is devalue the fancy cloak market. Probably a 2 out of 10. The Clockwork Amulet is an intriguing one. Once a day, when you make an attack, you can choose to have 10 be the number that you rolled, as it were. It permits a single, supernaturally average strike. Of course, the best time to use this is when you've got disadvantage, when you're blind or you can't see or something else horrible is happening, and you're just hoping that a 10 plus whatever modifier you've got hits anyway. The fact that it only works for a single attack roll isn't great though. There's very few creatures that are going to be weak enough to die to the average person rolling an average dice. This has some niche use if a person finds themselves ambushed under the cover of absolute darkness, I guess, to get one potentially normally averagely lucky strike in 3 out of 10.
Clothes of Mending really do what they say on the tin. They repair any daily wear and tear to themselves magically. These could be prohibitively expensive for your average labourer, for whom they would be most useful, but for merchants and travellers, these could be exactly what they're looking for to avoid spending long nights by the fire sewing up holes in their clothes, patching over things, and generally coming across as unprofessional or like a vagrant when they arrive in a new place. They're for social climbing hopefuls, really. Although, if you could mass produce Clothes of Mending for cheaply enough, they are really the only clothes a labourer will ever need, be they working in the farms or in the mines. This is a really, really useful item to have, especially if you're a long-lived species like elves, dwarves, or gnomes. If they can be produced cheaply enough, these might be up to an 8 out of 10, but as they are, for 50 gold, a week's work and some monster bits, I'm afraid we're more talking about a 5. The Coin of Delving from the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount lets off some small light, and when dropped, it lets off a chime when it hits the ground to let anyone in the area know exactly quite how deep this space that it has fallen is, as long as they can hear this chime. Depending on how accurate this is, this coin could be amazing. Accurately measuring out bridges or structures more generally, for construction, for example, or plumbing the depths of the ocean to test exactly how deep it goes, how far you need to weigh your anchor, for example. Of course, you should always be attaching this coin to a string. 5 or 6 out of 10. The cuddly Strixhaven mascot is quite strange. It must be pressed onto a limb where it stays for an hour and grants you the once-a-day ability to get advantage on avoiding being frightened or ending the frightened condition on yourself. This is not very useful, and to be entirely honest, if something comes across with a fear effect, the average person should probably run away anyway. It could be used by guards fighting against a dragon attack if they were coordinated enough to have a bunch of these in store, but I'm afraid it's probably going to be a 2 out of 10. The Dark Shard Amulet is an attunable warlock focus that allows a warlock to use a cantrip that they don't know from the warlock spell list once per long rest. Cantrips are really good because you can spam them. You can't with this one. You can use one cantrip once, it's not very powerful, and it's only attunable by warlocks. This is useless, even for PCs. 1 out of 10. The Doublet of Dramatic Demise may seem useless. It allows you to become incapacitated instead of being knocked unconscious when you're hit down to 0 hit points. You have 0 speed, but you can speak and communicate. But you're still making death saving throws, and a natural 1 on one of those kills you instantly. In most cases, the creature loudly shouting for help while dying is going to be targeted far faster than any individual that is just bleeding out unconsciously quietly. But if we were to rule blowing a distress whistle as, say, communication, I could very much see certain guardsmen, certain perhaps palace guardsmen, wearing the Doublet of Dramatic Demise just to make sure that they can alert anyone, even if they're assassinated in a single blow. Despite this niche use case, we're probably going to put this at a 3 out of 10. Much like the Cloak of Billowing, the Dread Helm is entirely cosmetic. It makes your eyes glow red when you're wearing it. As funny as that is, it's a 1 out of 10. The Ear Horn of Hearing is an interesting one. It, quote, suppresses the deafened condition on you, allowing you to hear normally, as long as you hold it to your ear. If hearing loss or deafness as a disability count as imposing the deafened condition on you, then this is a relatively cheap fix to that particular problem. I can see this being used by wealthy families to aid their deaf people, or perhaps even rented out by a religious order for the common good, until such time as a cleric can come round and actually fix the deafness permanently. But that's only if deafness is considered the condition deafness. If not, this is useless. Barring some bizarre use case that I probably can't imagine. If it is, maybe a 6 out of 10. The Earring of Message holds 5 charges which can be used to cast the Message cantrip without attunement by anyone. It recharges at a rate of 3.5 charges on average every dawn. This is theoretically 3 to 5 free cantrips every single day for someone who isn't a spellcaster. In loud environments like mines, forges and factories, or during times that require silence or discretion, like passing messages in court during a play, informing the king of something really important while he's taking an audience, or coordinating a strike team, giving orders in battle, or arranging a group of assassins in just the right spot. This is really quite indispensable. A two-way whisper that can only be heard by the caster and the recipient is pretty excellent. And you don't need to be a spellcaster to use it. 8 out of 10. This is pretty good. Enduring spellbooks cannot deteriorate with age or be damaged by fire or water damage. These should be standard equipment for most mages in training. For roughly the price of copying 2 new spells into your spellbook, your spellbook is now pretty well indestructible to regular wear and tear and indeed age. This is pretty much a no-brainer for any wizard who wants to keep their spellbook around them, which is, funnily enough, most wizards. 5 out of 10 because it's useful for wizards, but just wizards. An ersatz eye, requiring attunement, replaces a real eye that has been lost or removed with a magical eye that has full normal function. An added benefit to functioning as a normal eye is that this doesn't function exactly as well as the eye you just lost. Thus, people with visual impairments, not necessarily blindness, but visual impairments, might find this incredibly useful if they're, willing to have their eye out over it. Certain kinds of blindness and eye injuries could also be cured by this item as well. But again, there are clerics who can fix the blinded condition. Again, arguable as to whether that affects actual blind people or not. 7 out of 10. Everbright lanterns cast light in a 120-foot range with no oxygen required and producing no heat. This is a fairly solid magic item for areas that are underwater or might be filled with flammable gases that you definitely don't want a naked flame getting anywhere near. 6 out of 10. Feather tokens are cool. When you fall at least 20 feet, they activate, granting you essentially the effects of Featherfall, where you drift downwards at a rate of 90 feet per second and don't take any fall damage when you land. These tokens lose all their magic once the person has landed, but they can save anyone's life from falling once. Travelling merchants, explorers, and people who just live up in the mountains or near cliffs might just want to get one of these just in case. It could very well save a life. There's also the fact that you can theoretically keep this effect going forever, as unlike Featherfall, it doesn't have a time limit, and it only ends when you land. I'm sure some munchkin can do something with that. Maybe granting you a 60-foot falling speed in, say, the astral plane, where you can fall, theoretically, in any direction, and never necessarily have to touch land. Who knows? Either way, this is probably a 5 out of 10. Glamourweave, while cool, is largely useless, at least in its common form. All this allows is for your clothes to have a moving illusory pattern on them. This isn't terribly useful for anything. The uncommon version has its place, but As a common magic item, it's only really useful for fashion or hiding yourself in amongst a disco. 2 out of 10. A Hat of Vermin also seems relatively useless. It summons a bat, frog, or rat which has no allegiance but for getting as far away from you as possible as quickly as it can. If the creature dies or an hour passes, they vanish. The best use case I can see is for testing for poisonous gases inside a mine. Summon a bat while standing blocking the entrance, and then chase it deeper and deeper into the mine. If the bat disappears, that pocket is probably not safe. It is a bit of a niche use though. 3 out of 10. The Hat of Wizardry is the Dark Shard amulet just for wizards. A once-a-day cantrip that can be cast from the wizard spell list that you don't know. It's really useless. You have to be a wizard to attune to it anyway, so just learn better cantrips, I guess. Plus, it takes an attunement slot. 1 out of 10. Seward's handy spice pouch, on the other hand, is pretty incredible. 10 charges, and you can use one to pull out a pinch of a non-magical spice, or seasoning, as it's referred to in the book, which, this is guaranteed to be enough to season a single meal. Does this supplant the entire global spice trade? Not quite. Sometimes you do need to entertain for larger groups of people, and maybe one meal needs 3 to 5 to 10 different seasonings to make it properly, which is the case in our modern world, that's for sure. Will most wealthy folk have this in their kitchens? Absolutely. At various points in history, seasonings were extremely expensive commodities. Roman soldiers were paid in salt, hence salary, and saffron has for quite some time been one of the most prized and expensive spices out there, even in our modern day. This is another of those items that will eventually pay for its own use, and in this case pretty quickly if you're using some of the pricier spices. But it doesn't supplant the entire worldwide spice trade, which I'll knock a point off for. 9 out of 10. The Horn of Silent Alarm is arguably just strictly better than the Earring of Message. The Horn of Silent Alarm can alert any creature within 600 feet. Not just a creature within 120 feet that you are required to point at and therefore know their location, even if they're past a thin wall. Unfortunately, it can only make the sound of a horn, which is beamed directly from you silently into another creature's ear, not specific words and instructions. If you're able to blow the horn in coded rhythms as part of your action, this might indeed be strictly better than the Earring of Message. 9 out of 10. Illuminator's tattoos allow the bearer to write with their fingertip as if it were an ink pen with infinite ink. And once a day to write in a script that is invisible to any creature except its intended recipient for 24 hours. Although it requires attunement, this revolutionises both scribing and spycraft for the average person, and clerks in courts get another tool to be master information brokers. 9 out of 10. Imbued wood foci, on the other hand, are useless. They add 1 to the damage of a specific elemental type that you are using a spell on anyway, and you have to attune to them. 1 out of 10. The Instrument of Illusions may see great use, actually, as a premium musical instrument. Just like with Futurama's holophone, you can conjure images and illusions as you play the instrument, which is pretty incredible, all things considered. And these illusions can be up to 15 feet squared if you're a bard. Technically, bard here is in lowercase, so as per WotC's style guides, this can refer to a general person who considers themselves to have the profession bard, not just the class specifically. I can imagine this instrument spawning its own talent, its own skill, its own performance art in an entirely new form of mixed media across the wealthy courts and eventually trickling down into performances for the regular folk. This is an entirely new way to do music and live performance. It's probably going to shape the way that performance is seen by the masses, especially virtuosic solo performance. So we'll give this another 9 out of 10. Instruments of scribing, on the other hand, are interesting for a different reason. They don't necessarily focus on creating majestic performances. Instead, these are almost strictly useful in espionage settings. They allow the performer to secretly write an up to 15-word message on a surface within 30 feet while they perform. A performer can become an excellent dispenser of secret messages without any contact being made between two agents, especially if these messages are written by the instrument of scribing in Thieves' Cant. This is really fun and really thematic. Touring musicians make excellent spies, and the ability to dead drop information to someone in the crowd of a performance without ever interacting with them is really quite awesome. It does require attunement and does have quite a niche use case though, so I'm probably going to give this a 6 or 7 out of 10. The key charm demonstrates a really cool feature of Eberron's design. It allows the bearer of the key charm to receive notifications from an alarm spell, not just the caster. Allows them to bypass arcane locks with the caster's permission and to not trigger glyphs of warding. Unfortunately, it requires attunement by a person with a dragon mark of warding, which is quite the limiting factor if you're not playing in a setting that uses dragon marks. It's a useful item if you can bypass this restriction. A situational 8 out of 10 for aiding in magical defense. For a common item, the Lantern of Tracking has a couple of uses that are seen nowhere else in the entire game of D&D. It sheds some minor light when fueled with oil, but its main effect is to alert the bearer to the presence of certain types of creatures, a specific type for each lantern's construction. It detects a specific creature type within 300 feet and the light burns green when it does detect such a thing. Detect Good and Evil demonstrates aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, and undead. And rangers can add dragons to that list. But only a Lantern of Tracking, as far as I'm aware, can detect constructs, giants, and monstrosities. These 3 lanterns for these 3 specific threats put in the centre of the town saves most towns pretty well. Plus 1 for any local specific threats that have been bothering you recently for when the local ranger hasn't got their primeval awareness active, or the local paladin has no longer got divine sense. For their unique abilities, and the fact that they can give early warning of doppelganger invasions, which is pretty potent, I'm going to give these a 7 out of 10. The Lock of Trickery seems to be a normal lock. It comes with a regular DC 15 as described in its stat block, but at DM's discretion can come at a variety of different difficulty classes as well. It looks normal, but it gives disadvantage on any attempt to pick it. In the best case scenario, this turns a 1 in 20 chance into a 1 in 400 chance, which might give guardsmen all the time they need to actually find the very frustrated rogue who's doing their absolute best to get in. A magical lock that gives an average penalty of around 5 to any thief trying to break into it is a pretty good tool in any repertoire of defending a certain place. So I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. The Musk Charm and Masquerade Tattoo are very similar. Both allow the user to cast Disguise Self once a day, and if they're investigated very closely, it's a DC 13 check to see through the disguise. The former is a physical pin, which can have its detect magic. The former is a physical pin, which can have its Disguise Self duration extended to 6 hours if you choose, but the pin becomes inert, non-magical immediately after that. The pin can also be taken off of you eliminating your disguise instantly. On the other hand, the Masquerade Tattoo requires attunement and lets you cast the spell with no extension, but also no interruptions possible. However, what makes this tattoo better is a really cool ribbon feature, whereby you can shift the tattoo around your body and change its shape. This feature alone would make an excellent magic item, allowing you to fake membership of gangs or cults, which require members to get a certain type of very obvious tattoo potentially. But when attached to the ability to have one free cast of a first level spell every day, well, Masquerade tattoos are a 9 out of 10, and the Mask Charm a 7 out of 10. Critical Role Call of the Netherdeep introduced a collection of magic items that are consumable called medals. These universally instantly become non-magical once their effects are activated. The medals of Muscle and Wit give advantage on Strength and Intelligence checks and saving throws for an hour. Muscle is arguably more useful, say you need a sudden burst of strength to lift some rocks and rubble off of a trapped person, perhaps. So that's a 5 out of 10. But Wit is a tad more esoteric, with the nature of Intelligence being a bit fuzzier. I would say potentially its main use might be by students who haven't worked hard enough and are trying to cram in exam situations and trying to gain just some small chance, some small advantage where they can, which might bump it up to a 4 out of 10 among certain wizard school exam situations. The Medal of the Maze has a similar effect, but for wisdom checks only, and also lets you know the fastest route out of any non-magical path or maze for 1 hour. This may help people find their way back to civilization when lost in the deep woods or something, but only if they have the medal with them when they're lost, and only if they have a medal in the first place. This might be given to children, but I'm just going to say it's a 4 out of 10. Medals of the Conch grant a swimming speed equal to walking speed for 1 hour. This could be useful if someone doesn't know how to swim at all and finds themselves pulled away in the water, or for rescuing people who are being swept away by fast currents. A swimming speed of 30 feet is nothing to joke at. So I'm going to say, for some life-saving potential, or however niche, we'll call this a 5 out of 10. The Medal of the Horizon Back lets essentially anyone cast Shield exactly once when hit by an attack. This may help someone escape, specifically if they take their turn and dash instead of disengaging, provoking an attack of opportunity. Then they can use their reaction to activate the medal, giving themselves +5 to AC, hopefully missing the hit and getting as far away as possible from the assailant that has just come to hurt them. I'd say this is possibly a 6 out of 10 as a real emergency panic button. The Medal of the Wetlands makes difficult terrain not cost extra movement for 1 hour, which isn't very useful for consuming a magic item. 2 out of 10. But the Medal of the Meat Pie is far and away the best. It grants 2d4 plus 2 temporary hit points, which at minimum doubles the health of the average commoner. And they last until depleted or a long rest has taken place. If they sense any danger, the average person may well be inclined to use this if they have it, while, say, hiding from monsters, or in preparations, desperate preparations, knowing that their town is about to be attacked. It's a really proportionally significant boost for low-level or no-level humanoids, and that does include goblins, kobolds, and all sorts of raiding parties, bandits as well. So, worth noting in addition. It may actually become an important cultural feature of a society to have these medals passed out by clerics just in case of something like this happening. 7 out of 10. Now I must apologise to you, partly for the length of the video and partly because this is only half of the common items in 5th edition. But as you can tell, this video was an absolute monster to make. So I have some good news for you. Part 2 is most likely coming out directly after this next week. And with next week's video, there will be a collation of some of the absolute most impactful, where I will settle upon a winner for most impactful common magic item in the entire game. I hope you're looking forward to that. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.